Welcome everyone to this CALT Kōrero panel discussion. I'd like to thank our audience today for attending, and I also warmly welcome people joining online. I'm Peyton Bond, a teaching fellow in sociology, gender studies, and criminology at the University of Otago. I've been a teaching assistant for papers taught at OCF, Otago Corrections, for the past couple of years, and I will be facilitating today's discussion on teaching inside a prison environment, both the challenges and the benefits. The team here today are part of a pilot program to offer university papers inside Otago Corrections facility, and we'll be talking about their experiences. But first, here's a short video outlining the pilot.
In 2021, in a partnership between the University of Otago and Otago Corrections Facility, a university paper, The Sociology of Crime and Deviance, was taught inside Otago Corrections Facility. While prison students can learn via distance in Aotearoa, New Zealand, this pilot program is the only one of its kind where academics go inside the prison to work with the students and the education tutors. Since 2023, another paper, Working with People, the New Zealand Context, has also been taught in person at OCF. Today we're going to talk about teaching inside a correction setting and how new approaches are offering important opportunities.
We will be taking questions at the end, so those of you online, please send your questions through as they arise, and we'll do our best to answer those for you along with questions from our studio audience here. I am joined today by my four colleagues, Shane, Fairley, Cherie, and Amy, who I now invite to introduce themselves.
Kia ora, Shane Walker. I've been teaching at Otago for 23 years, and teaching down at the corrections facility is one of the best things I've done. Kia ora.
Kia ora, I'm Fairley Gilmore. I'm a senior lecturer in criminology and gender studies here at Otago, and I coordinate the paper, The Sociology of Crime and Deviance, which is one of the papers that we're teaching at OCF.
Hi, Cherie Lukey. I'm Practice Manager Education and Training for the Southern Region. So I support education and industry training around the South Island prisons. I've got about 16 years experience working in corrections.
Kia ora, I'm Amy Beebe, and I'm the Learning and Interventions Delivery Manager out at OCF. And so I oversee all programs in education that run on site. And in terms of corrections, I'm more of a baby. I've only been around for about 5 years.
Lovely, thanks so much for that, and I'm very excited to be here with you guys today. I was hoping maybe we could start with Fairley and Cherie, just talking a bit about how this program began.
Sure, so I started working with OCF. We started with a volunteering program. So some of the criminology students were going out there to do creative writing, and I met Cherie when I first asked about doing that, and Cherie came to visit and was super supportive and made that happen. And then a wee bit later, Chris Rudd, a colleague from politics, had been thinking about doing a university paper at the prison, and I went and had a chat to him about what he was planning to do, and he was like, well, if you already have this relationship and you're going out there, why don't you teach one of your papers? So I had a yarn to Cherie, who was very supportive, so Chris did a lot of the helping to get it started on the university side, and then on the corrections side, that was Cherie.
Yes, so very excited when Fairley put the proposal on the table to have that partnership between Otago Corrections and their local university seemed quite positive, and yes, so much potential for the learners to engage in with their local university. So I definitely jumped at the chance. Also with the criminology paper, because it's a study into crime and the impacts on society from a sociology point of view, just saw the benefits for the learners actually to unpack that as well. And a lot of learners at Otago have an interest in the social services field, you know, from a lived experience, and they wanting to help others. So this paper also giving them very good foundation in terms of a pathway to pursue that as a career.
And Shane, when did you become involved?
Beginning of last year, or just before that, Fairley and Anaru came to see me and said, "You're interested in doing something down at the prison, and usually I'm down there visiting people. So it was good to go to think about something constructive, and I think I said yes without even thinking about it.
You did.
I just thought, yeah, I'm in, and really pleased with everything that they had set up, because the stuff that, you know, that I think there's a room in hell for is administrative stuff, and so all of that was sorted. It just made it so much easier and doable, and I just had to concentrate on what I was there for. So thank you.
Yeah, definitely. That was definitely the challenge in the beginning, because you know, corrections processes and the university process just for enrolment. Yeah, it was like oil and water basically. And I do have to also mention Frederica, which there'll be a video around, who's the education tutor there, that did a lot of that work as well to get it started.
Absolutely.
We already trusted Fred because she was my tutor when I was at uni.
Oh, really? Wow.
So it was just such a delight. Yeah.
And one of the reasons why I approached Shane is, you know, obviously because Shane's awesome, but also a lot of the guys had been talking about how they'd like to do things like social work in the future, because they wanted to do things that would help people. And I think that's maybe not a stereotype we have of people who are incarcerated, but that's one of the, you know, key things they wanted to do, was to contribute to society and help people when they got out.
Yeah, that whole lived experience, wanting to help others, is a common theme that is running through. And when we heard that you were interested, it was just like, oh, hell yes.
Well, I used to look forward to it. I mean, it was a busy life trying to plan it all in, but driving down there, you know, it was just such good time to prep, and also, you know, they've done the readings 5 times. You know, you're going there for an intelligent conversation. You also know that whatever you're teaching or discussing with them, they apply to their lives in that setting. So whatever you put together has, in my view, very real consequences in terms of the way they're learning. In that sense, you know, you really wanted to be well prepped, but also, and I think this is down to you, Feely, putting the paper into a package that fits both the university requirements and corrections requirements, like the bits that you take out, because, and I'll call them residents, not prisoners, because residents down there don't have the same access to things that students here have and all that kind of thing. And so the extra running around by OCF staff made it so much easier for us. Every time I turned up, they had everything and were well ready, even when our system didn't work.
And that's a really good point. And Amy and I talk quite a bit about how, you know, the learners, the students actually see themselves as students, which is, you know, it's very empowering. Yeah.
Wasn't that great? Better to see yourself as a student rather than a prisoner.
Well, on that note, maybe we will now watch the video from Frederica, who was mentioned earlier. So Frederica is an education tutor out at OCF and has been hugely instrumental in making this all happen. And she's going to talk a bit about how people who are incarcerated feel about having this access to tertiary education.
I first began working at Corrections Otago facility in the education when I took up the opportunity and applied for a tutor position. And sort of initially it started off teaching 1 day a week, and the rest of the time was doing education assessments and interviews, but over time it's grown. The best part about the teaching, and particularly OCF, is the unique opportunity that the Otago team has provided to our men in our care. It's unlike any other that they've experienced. And I think they are in a very privileged position. They have, you know, very direct contact with the lecturers, you know, the experts in the subject and the tutors. And sort of that's regular, it's structured, you obviously care, create forums where the men can talk about their own experience, which is very broad, and sort of in a forum where it's valid and their worldview has meaning, and they can discuss things in a meaningful and academic framework. And they're succeeding. They're proving to themselves that they can, and they do, and they are doing it. And that has huge impact on their self-esteem. It's been so successful because there's been a lot of work on both sides, both OCF and and Otago University have been very collaborative, and we've together, sort of overcome the obstacles. And your delivery, it's, it's responsive, it's structured, it's accommodates, our unique environment, and it supports our individual needs of our learners, and and you go out of the way to make it accessible and to help our students succeed. So they feel part of a collaborative process, and they're in partnership with you. They're not aliens, they're important students. The benefits for the learners from my perspective is that they love the whole process. They love, the lecturers and the tutors coming out. They love the discussions. They were industrious in their reading, getting prepared for the discussions, and they had a forum when they, could contribute on a very meaningful basis. And their experience was very broad and seeped in New Zealand history, was out there in an academic medium that was accepted as valid and real. And they succeeded. You gave them lots of support, and and they, worked really industriously, and they saw themselves in a new light. They could achieve academically, and it was really rewarding, and supported their self-esteem, and gave them a positive focus in prison. Now I'm going to read some of the comments that our learners have actually made about their experience and how it benefited them. One learner said, "Yes, it has set me up for a brighter future and it has elevated my ability to understand myself on a deeper level, plus understand current events in society." Another learner said, "I've achieved more than I ever thought possible. I appreciate the opportunities given me to engage and succeed. I've found a new love for learning. I've been able to learn things that interest and challenge me, and that's made all the difference. The education team here is supportive and helpful. Resources are readily available. The feedback I have been given is helpful and necessary. My experience here has given me much needed direction and a solid set of goals for the future."
Thank you so much to Frederica. That was really wonderful to hear. I wonder if any of our panelists would like to add to what Frederica shared. I know that Shane's already mentioned level of preparedness, which was huge for when I went out with Fairleigh. Just the most engaged and prepared students I'd ever had. It was amazing.
Yeah, having spoken with a few of the students who have been able to engage in both papers delivered out there, I think the biggest thing was that they were actually engaged and part of the education system, when a lot of people who come to prison haven't been able to engage in the education system because they felt like they didn't fit in. They felt they had so much other things going on in their life that they couldn't put that time into education, and a lot of them kind of think they're past that point in their life. No, I just need to get employed, is a lot of what we see. But talking to these men who took the leap and engaged in this, the self-confidence that they've developed that they can pursue a university degree despite what's happened in the past is huge for them. And to be able to be a part of the group that was learning in the community at the same time, to attend lectures at the same time, to have those same tutorials face-to-face that students on campus get was huge, and they got a huge sense of belonging from that.
Also, the value in being able to track this at the same time as community learners. And it was huge for them to watch the live lectures. It was, that really immersed them into the student pathway.
To even know that the other students were sitting their exams at the same time as them.
Yes.
Was a big thing, which you wouldn't often think about as really mattering, but for them it was huge.
And the live stream is a bit newer. Would you mind touching a bit more?
Well, actually, it's one of the good things that came out of COVID, just one of the minor things, because as you can imagine, a lot of things, same as the community, a lot of things slowed down and stopped. So, but on the flip side, it increased the use of ABL. So we already had students at the time enrolled, and so using that as a platform for them to keep up and keep on going with their studies. So that opened the door for us to think about, well, you know, why not? So Fairleigh set that up on the university side of things, which was great, to be able to, for the students to be able to watch that, the lectures live. That was massive.
Yes, it was something they specifically said they really enjoyed, and I would like say hi to them as well. I'd be like, "Oh, so hi guys," when I was doing a lecture, and the fact that they were getting it at the same time, and I was saying good day to them, and they could tease us about some of our outfit choices and so on. Like it was just nice. I do think the in-person tutorials has been really awesome. Like I know there is distance learning available, and I think that's really important. But I think for some people, they did seem to get a lot out of being included in the class, of having Shane and me and Peyton go out there and run the tutorials. And I think a lot of people engage well with that kind of learning, where you can work on ideas together and have those conversations, and be encouraged in that way to like learn that yes, your ideas and your contributions are great. So I think that was awesome.
And that's a huge part of the university experience, is the collaboration during those tutorials, getting those new ideas and new perspectives so that they can develop their own perspective is huge. And so it's really good that they don't miss out on that. And I think things are only going to improve as technology improves for people in prisons, because access is always going to be looked at and developed. It's slow. It's always slow, but it's definitely improving, and that's only going to improve our partnership even more.
Yeah, I suppose a point to make is that the guys were watching the lectures, but they were like a week delayed, maybe 2 weeks delayed, being able to do that whole process of the exchange. And so it was a really important evolution of what we're doing.
And the collaboration was awesome. If one of the students understood something more than the other ones, you could almost step back so that they would talk with each other. And it was such a wonderful part, I think, particularly of the in-person part, was that they could help each other in a way that, like, they had us there sort of, you know, if we need to step in, but they were really happy to help each other, which was really awesome to see, especially with that lived experience when we're talking about criminology and such. They just have this like awesome perspective that, you know, I don't have, and they were able to share that and make that into something like their essays. Reading their essays was just incredible.
I think if people aren't going to be involved in criminal behaviour, what are they going to be involved in, and how are they going to learn to do that? And I think that's what we're doing there. So for me, if you don't come away from that setting wanting to be a better human being, there's something wrong with you. And I felt like that every time I left there. I'd get in the car and drive home and just feel like I'd done something worthwhile, and that those men had spoken something useful into my life. You know, so it definitely wasn't one way. No. It was two-way conversations, and often realistic, hardcore, to-the-bone conversations, and often not at the same level that you would have them on campus, because the stakes are quite different in an incarcerated setting. So, for instance, if you're going to talk about power, and who holds power, how it's maintained, all those kinds of things, in an incarcerated environment, they're very definite in how they apply the theoretical approaches you're teaching on that. And also, if they're rubbish, you know, if they don't work, they might work theoretically, but in terms of real life, they may not. And I love the way that they just launch straight into that, you know, and so you would turn up ready for kind of intellectual debate, intellectual fun, and these are not the kinds of things that incarcerated settings, and I'm purposefully not calling them prisons, And it's because every one of those people has the capacity to make good decisions. We're all only a few bad decisions away from being where they are. So what is it we have learned so that we have made decisions that keep us out of places like that? And so to me, that's the real value of the teaching. The real value of the teaching is when they can construct a sentence in a paragraph and do it well with logic. The take home from that is they may be able to do that with their partners. They may be able to do that with their kids, you know, because I see this as treating them as fully human, because when you hear their stories, you realise how many bits of them are missing and were never put in there for starters. And so again, it was just one of the joys of my week, you know. On my way home, I'd usually start getting calls, and people would say, "Oh, you're in a good mood," and I'd go, "I've just been down to visit some mates at Milton," and that's what it felt like. Conversations with mates, as opposed to me being an expert in anything.
And I think the way that they engaged can be put to the word vulnerable, and it's not something you'd think about when thinking about people in prison, that they would be vulnerable and let others into their way of thinking, their experiences, and apply them so openly with people, especially when they then have to go back to a unit. But I think that the space that we've created at OCF, particularly Frederica, our education tutor, and then the way that everyone came in, that you guys came in and ran them, really created a space where it was safe to be vulnerable and to actually apply these things to themselves. And I think then the results speak for themselves and how they then performed in those papers.
And I think it's also the whole team in the programs building. So for the students to come into the programs building, it is a place of learning. So it's a totally different vibe, which is supported by, you know, Amy and her team, the whole team.
Well, I think we've touched a little bit on why this is exciting, at least I can pull out from what you guys have said. But I wonder a bit more about why it's so especially exciting, and also what are we hoping for in the future, because I think all of us want to see this to be a sustainable and growing project. Maybe we'll start with Fairley?
Sure. I mean, oh God, there's so many things about this that I think are very exciting, hence why I'm so involved in it. You know, one thing definitely is, you know, most of the big studies that look at things around desistance or so on, you know, what stops people not ending up back incarcerated. Education is the single biggest thing that we can do. So to see more of it is amazing. Like Shane said, you know, there's nothing more exciting to me as an educator than showing up to a tutorial where everyone has done all of their reading, is so excited to be there and wants to contribute, which, yeah, it's a nice thing. Yeah.
And international studies do speak for themselves when you look at much wider scales, much bigger projects. Sheree and I watched a video recently where in the US 500 people have completed a college degree program in prison, and only 4% have reoffended since. Only 20,
which is extraordinary.
It's huge. And that really takes out a lot of other factors that you might think could contribute to it. So it shows that it might not be education alone, but that's a big factor, is engaging in education is a huge thing, and it widens up their opportunity so much more when they get out to things that they wouldn't even think about that they could pursue in the future.
It definitely increases their opportunities, and I know you and I are quite biased when it comes to education and the impact of it. So, but still, you know, education provides them the skills to engage in other programs like the rehabilitation programs and the like. So it really enhances the impact of those programs. So it's exciting across the board, really.
I think the sky's the limit, really. I got kicked out of half a dozen secondary schools, and I'm currently an associate professor at Otago, and really at 16 I thought I would be going to jail like all my mates, but someone took an interest, learned how to read, all those kinds of things. And so if you're not going to be a criminal, then what are you going to be? And I think this program is about what some of them want to be. I had a whole number of them ask me, if I do something with this, does that mean that I won't be able to become a social worker because, I have a history of offending? And I said, no, that's not the case at all. If you want to define yourself like that, that's up to you. But the profession doesn't say at its door, if you've offended, stay outside. In fact, the profession attracts people that are putting their lives back together. And I think that's, again, what this program is about. These are the parts of things that those young men never had when they were kids. Even after getting kicked out of so many schools, I was lucky enough to still have the basics. So these men, they're kind of relearning the basics at speed and applying it to their lives. It's just magnificent. And I'm not surprised that the recidivism rate for people doing quals inside is so low. That stacks up with experience I've had in Scandinavia and in other parts of Europe, where and we've been warned about being political in this, but whoever is in power for the next whatever we're doing in government, please don't sacrifice things like this. This is about what people do while they're there and what they're going to do when they come out. If we're serious about them being fully involved in our society, fully as human beings, then we have to be doing things like this. And that's how I felt my job was down there. And I want to Mihi to the uni for letting us do it. Some people would say it's a poor use of some very expensive time. But actually I think it was the university putting on its social justice and human rights face in a very real way. So Mihi to the uni for that.
Yeah, totally agree with that. And in terms of hopes for the future, we've talked about this quite a bit, and it's something we just want to keep on growing, keep on strengthening that partnership, and again, that partnership between the Otago Corrections Facility and the Otago University, both in the same area, same region, having that partnership is really important.
Yeah, I know that we'd love to see more papers, and there's plans in place for more papers to come out as well. And so for maybe anybody watching along, hopefully wants to take their papers out, what sort of advice would you offer?
Well, firstly, feel free to come chat to me if anyone wants to take their papers out. I always like to talk to people about that. I guess one thing we do have to keep in mind is there is just always less access to the internet and so on for security reasons in corrections. And I think that can actually, this is definitely not an insurmountable barrier. I actually think it's been really interesting in terms of teaching to think about what are we trying to achieve in terms of our teaching? How do we do that with slightly different resources? And I think that's good for us to actually reflect on our pedagogy and try and offer those things in a, in a similar way with different resources and do it really effectively. So you just have to be a little creative, sometimes a bit innovative, and make it work. And sometimes technology helps us as well. Like I make these daggy videos where it's like looks like Twitch streaming, basically, where you can see my little face and you can see what like a Google Scholar search looks like. And so the guys can actually see how searching works and suggest search terms and do all those things. So even though we have limited technology, we can also use technology to help us. But I'd encourage anyone to just be a bit creative and also come and chat to me. And also know that the teaching out there's, like Shane said, I think Peyton would agree, like it was always the favourite part of our week.
Oh yeah.
So I wouldn't be shy about going into this setting. It's very safe, supported, and like the guys are wonderful.
But it's at the same standard and the same responsibility and the same expectations as every community, every student in the community as well. And I think that's an important point, and that's where a lot of pride comes from the guys as well. The flexibility, being creative, and rolling with the challenges, and it's that partnership, communication between all parties.
Yeah.
You can't say this, but we can. We also want your bosses to make sure. No, we also want your bosses to make sure you can still keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
That's critical.
I do have to acknowledge the assistant prison director and the prison director, because they do support. They do see the benefit of it. When I was in the role, had to run it by assistant prison director Renee, and you had to keep her in the loop all the way through. So, very fortunate to have very supportive people on site as well.
When I've worked with people who have come out of prison, it's generally the mundane stuff that trips them up, like the paying bills, paying rent, going to buy groceries, a whole lot of kind of things that we would all just consider to be normal things that we achieve every week. And I saw what we were doing in teaching is giving them some tools to deal with the mundane, so that when they come out, they're very real. And I think you're right. It did take a bit of refining from us in terms of the pedagogy, because you got rid of superfluous fluff, stuff that in other settings you might consider to be academic holy grails, because you really wanted to cut to the chase with these men because of the limited time you had with them. So you wanted to really make it count. And so for some of them there were, what I would call less fluff, less background stuff, because it wasn't needed. And so you had to be refined in what you were doing.
Definitely. And in terms of like those kind of teaching some skills, I do think there's something, and this isn't just education, I think it's also things like performing arts or whatever in corrections. There's an element where it is a little bit stressful for the guys. Like they're a bit nervous the first time they have to speak in the toots, they're a bit nervous about some of the assessment, but being able to work through some slightly negative emotions in a way that's very supported, and the outcomes have all been positive. They've all done so well and are so proud in the end. I think that's really good to get to have lots of those experiences.
And I think that's what we really aim at OCF, is to make that programs building a place that is uncomfortable. We offer a really diverse range of programs in education that are all designed to really put them out of their comfort zones and start to move towards the future. A lot of being in prison is feeling like you're stuck in one place and you can't make progress in your life, but the programs building, what we aim that to be at OCF, is a place where they start to make progress towards their future. And Shane touched on something before about the mundane things, and not because they don't get to do a lot of those things in prison. Coming into prison, a lot of your choices, a lot of your opportunities of your day-to-day, what you can do, are taken away from you. But when they then engage in something like this, is they get that control pretty much entirely in their hands. Their engagement and their great results and the progress they made during their time in those papers was entirely on them. We're there to support them in the education team. We're there to help them along the way and to help you guys connect with them. But it's up to them whether they study. It's up to them whether they do that reading. We're not there with them, because education on site is what we call self-directed learning. So how much they engage is up to them, and all of them chose to immerse themselves in it, and they took that power, and that's just created more opportunities for them in the future, which is great.
Absolutely. And I do want to do a quick reminder for those of you online, if you have any questions, to just pop them through for us. But I did have another question. Shane, you spoke briefly about sort of the university fronting up with social justice, for instance. I wondered if you could speak to how projects like this pilot program, speaks to the strategic frameworks of the university.
The Māori strategic framework at the uni is designed to create equity and outcomes for particular populations, i.e. in this case Māori. If you look at the residents of most prisons, they range between 50 and 70%, depending on male or female being Māori. If you speak to Andrew Beecroft, he will tell you that in his former role when he was the head youth court judge, 85% of people who appealed before him that he was sentencing, 85% of them had been in the care of what is now Oranga Tamariki, and B, had real issues with literacy. And weird that literacy has something to do with decision making and logic and how we structure our lives and things like that. And so I think there are some much broader issues that are up for grabs at the moment. And again, we're not allowed to speak about politics, but to me, going hard on crime means doing stuff like this well. This is going hardcore on crime. It is. Getting down there and getting amongst them and learning from them and with them. You know, none of us are any better. Kia ora. Sorry.
Kia ora. No, thank you. And did you want to speak at all to sort of how it might match up with corrections framework, and especially for the populations at OCF?
Yeah, so we have an overarching framework called Hokairangi, which you might have heard of, and that is about providing opportunities for everybody and bringing whānau into it, making it a more collaborative approach to support people on the pathway into the future, into non-offending. And I think by giving people the opportunity to participate in education, we are embedding that into what we do by giving them options and by supporting them along the pathways that they chose and bringing in the supports that are able to help them work towards a better version of themselves. With that, we are providing better opportunities for everybody on our site by doing that.
Both them, their family, community.
Yeah.
Because, you know, the vast majority of the people that we were working with will be released. So, you know, it's really important work that, you know, what we're doing and what corrections doing. There's so many different areas and of corrections doing that hard work to make those positive changes.
Yeah, you might just be working with the one face in front of you in the room, but their full whānau, their full community are behind them, and that's creating those little interactions is actually creating benefits for everybody in that.
So we do have a couple more minutes, I think, before we move to questions. And so I wondered, we spoke briefly about sort of the digital access and sort of how to get around that. I wondered if maybe you wanted to sort of talk through more specifically that pedagogy and how, for instance, you mentioned the videos of Google Scholar, and I know that we sort of have shifted as the digital access has shifted, but what that process looks like to make sure that it is equitable to campus, so like how we do that.
Sure. So I guess to me it meant really thinking about like what are the actual elements that we're hoping people learn from each part of the experience. And I think the way I approach my teaching in criminology is to take theoretical ideas but apply them to current issues in New Zealand, to contemporary laws, contemporary practices. And I think the students were very well able to embrace those parts of the course, often in far more nuanced and personal ways perhaps than a lot of the students outside. There is the element that becomes trickiest is maybe understanding research. So that's why I was mentioning I might make videos which show what the search looks like, get the guys to suggest search terms, bring back showing them what articles actually come up from their search terms, how would you like to refine those, and honestly working through those things in a little bit of detail. I think probably the guys got to think through it a little more than some of our students outside do, like what search terms you use, what databases you might use. I did think that was important to give them an idea of what those things look like, how they're experienced. Sometimes, for example, in the creative writing group, so not this teaching group, one time one of the creative writing volunteers got the guys to do an exercise where they had to practice writing emails, and one of them had never written an email or seen an email, so he had to guess a lot. So I do think it's important to try and present some of these visuals, try and explain how the databases work and so on. Our library resources, I think, are very good and can be used really well to kind of show like this is what this database looks like and to kind of show how these things work. So that's been really useful too.
Yeah, and I mentioned, and so that was a process to often get to for our course, for the essays at the end. And again, I said earlier, but it was just absolutely, it was such an honor to be able to read those essays at the end and see how they'd taken that sort of what might on sort of paper look very different to what students on campus, but really it just becomes so similar, and they did it so well and were so engaged and prepared that these essays were just phenomenal. And yeah, just such an honor and a pleasure to have worked with them and to read those at the end as well. Does anybody else have anything to add about just sort of what this has meant either out at prison or on campus or out in the incarcerated environment or on campus before we maybe move to some questions?
One thing I think's important to touch on, which Cherie alluded to at the start, was I think the biggest impact we've noticed on site is around the labels. So sometimes for the first time in their life, they're seeing themselves as something more than an offender or a prisoner, that they're seeing themselves as a student. I'm a university student attending a paper at the University of Otago, and I don't think that the true impact of that is really known. I know in myself, I was a university student and I really took that for granted, what a privilege that was. And for them to see themselves as a university student engaged in a paper and achieving really good results is a huge impact into their worldview and the opportunities they see for themselves going forward.
And enhancing that critical thinking through that, through the papers, and that then expands into better decision making. Evaluating and having insight in terms of making those future plans, decisions. The confidence that the guys you can see as they track through, and the pride. And they do want to do well. They want to ensure that they're not only not letting themselves down, but not letting you guys down, because they do value and appreciate the time that you put in.
I really felt that. It was kind of strongly relationship based, and even though I've visited a lot of people in different institutions, it took a wee while to kind of get that sorted to the right level. I think the other thing that I would do differently next time is I would do the first session really on how to do well in this paper, how to be in this paper, how to be at a university. Do you know what I mean? I was lucky that the ones I had some experience, but there were a whole lot of things that you take for granted in teaching a paper that you cannot take for granted with these guys.
Kōrero, did you have anything else to add?
Yeah, I think I think sometimes it might look on paper a little resource intensive because the class size is quite small, but I also think the more guys that get to do papers like this and the more it becomes just something that others will see themselves as doing, they can recommend it to other people and they'll be like, oh, this is something we can do. We can do university papers. I hope that it will grow and we'll get bigger classes. And I think there's only one way to do that is by starting small and growing it.
Yeah, and it would, and I really hope from this that more people reach out to, well, I'll say to Fairleigh, but really I think to any of us, if you are wanting to do papers, it would be so incredible to keep this growing. Yeah.
Imagine if we could offer them a whole undergraduate degree.
The dream. Yeah.
Might not
Yes,
be too
yes,
far
yes.
away.
Yeah. So
Not
yeah.
a bad idea.
Yeah. So we'll keep working towards that. Cool. So I wonder if we should now maybe open the floor to questions and answer any that we've received online as well. But I'll open to our audience first. It's like I see well, we've got a microphone here, and then we'll move to you next.
Thank you, everyone. Are we on? Thank you. And it's an interesting peek into a different space for many of us. And I suppose my key question, I have so many questions actually, that the fluffiness that you're talking about that you remove from your approach to educational teaching, do you think that's had an impact on the way you operate back within the university?
It's made me re-examine things that I've taught in the past and teach them differently. Because for some of them it made me focus back to main points. Because when you're going down there every couple of weeks and your timetable changes just as much as theirs. And so having staff that you can liaise with very quickly and get something sorted. And so you might not be able to do something at 4 that afternoon, but you can do something starting at 8 the next morning, which means leaving Dunedin at 7 just to ensure everything's right. So because you're doing things like that, you really want to get the best out of every minute you're putting in there. And so that was, I think, how it's made me change some things I want teaching here. And so I'll sit down with the person doing the bulk of the teaching on campus and just go, we'll discuss something, and then I'll go, so what? Because the men made me go, so what? If that makes sense.
Yeah. And the other question I'll just finish with was, for the ones that step out, in the sense they're talking about improving themselves, how does that relate to those that don't? I mean, is there tension between those that want to be engaging in the educational space against those within the institution that decide not to? Is there any sort of tension within? We all have this view of the hierarchies within these sort of institutional spaces.
It comes down to choice. If somebody wants to engage in education, we'll try very hard to provide them all the opportunities available.
And I think within OCF, what we try to do is, if education isn't the path they want to pursue, if they want to get into industry training, we'll support them in that sense to get them the qualifications they need beyond then. And people tend to respect the spaces that they go to on site. And so if someone's not got the interest in pursuing education, then that's fine. You don't need to put the energy into that. That's fine. We'll put our focus into the ones who do, and instead another person on site will pick up what they want to do. And so I feel like we've got a really good team on site who are able to work to identify what each person kind of wants to do. And if someone's not ready to do it yet, that's fine. we'll come back and check in a few months, and if you're motivated then we'll pick you up. We don't close the door on it completely. And I think that's a big role of what our tutors do on site, is to come up with that pathway of what people want to do.
And as Bailey touched on, students will encourage other students on site. So it's that role modelling on site that will increase that motivation to engage in education or industry training.
I completely agree. I think it can be such a confidence thing, and I remember even just when we'd sort of be grabbing a coffee, and so other people would be floating around in the programs area, and they'd be like, oh, like, what are you doing? What's going on? And just talking to them about it, and they'd be like, oh, that's interesting. Like, I don't know if I could do it. I'm like, oh, you totally could. And sort of just building that confidence, and learners who maybe didn't think they could coming in and showing that they can, and encouraging others. And I think I touched on earlier, just if someone understands a concept, someone else doesn't, just watching that sort of camaraderie there, and the encouraging of each other. And I think that extends beyond sort of the specific room where we may be teaching or tutoring, to wider into the program, and hopefully wider into the wider institution as well. Kia ora.
Well, thank you so much for this. It's completely revived for me a vigorous discussion I had with my son, who's a law professor in London, and we were debating the concept utu. And I said, utu, if you follow the real meaning, is restoring the balance. And he said, no, utu just means revenge. And I said, you've totally got that wrong. That's what's so wrong with the way most first world based penal systems deal with indigenous peoples. They've lost the sense of restoring the balance by building the person up, and they just obsessively stuck on the concept of punishment, which I did an experiment in my years ago as a master's in psychology, in neuropsychology, and all my rats were badly behaved and hated me. Why? Because I was teaching them with electric shocks and using it as punishment. And years later, when I reflected on that, I realised how I'd turned my rats into psychopathic rodents.
Kia ora. I think that's a beautiful statement. If we want people to function as fully human, then we have to put some things into them that make them fully human. When I was 12, my parents committed suicide separately. So within a month of each other, they both took their lives. As an angry teenager, all that kind of stuff. There's a whole lot about what pulls your life apart and what you do with it, how you react to it. And that's why I had real affinity with those men in prison, because the trauma and just the mongrelization of their lives and the stuff that they had lived with and walked with. And we expect them to come out of there and behave as fully functioning human beings. Well, fully functioning human beings only learn that through a number of things. And so for me, education was one of those things. And I really do see those things as fundamental human rights, not the human rights we can afford. I think it's socially just to be doing what we're doing down in Milton. And my hope is that every program at the uni would consider it. But if they do, they need to look in the mirror to make sure they're the right kind of humans to be in that context. Because those men need loving and caring for in what we speak, in the looks in our faces, and in the tone we take. They don't need anything else. They've had enough of that.
And we had that not only with the people who were going out, but for instance, the administrators in our program who would go above and beyond to print out certificates of completion and put them on nice paper and lovingly bind everything, and who would never meet the learners out at OCF, but wanted to do right by them. And that's been really important to everyone involved, and it's meant a lot. It's meant a lot to everyone who's been involved, and I really, I'm excited to keep seeing it grow. We've got about 5 more minutes, so maybe time for one more question. Maybe one or two, if we have some. I don't think we have any online.
A word from Heidegger, denken. Alles ist denken. Thinking. All is thinking. Teaching thinking, you are teaching all.
We've got one more question there. We'll pass it back. Thank you.
Hi, I'm a librarian here at the university, and I was just...
We love you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
I was just wondering what kind of support staff around the university are involved with this, if any? Could you tell me a little bit about that?
Sure. So the administrative staff have been incredibly helpful around like the student support and so on in terms of enrolment. I think Cherie saying oil and water earlier was very accurate. We just have 2 very different systems, and while the overarching attitude has been like, this is a good pilot, keep doing it, the systems just don't interact. So we've had administrative people get very creative making those things interact. As Peyton was saying, our in-department, like in-program admin support has been amazing, making sure everything's just like nicely done and bound and prepared in advance. In terms of access, obviously the guys don't actually have access to the library resources. So one of the great things is how well the library, things like say for criminology as a subject guide and so on the library is set up. It makes it really easy for me to film those things and kind of show what university resources look like, but those can't be accessed for security reasons.
Let's see, any more? Okay, well, maybe we will wrap it up there because we are running out of time. So thank you again to our studio audience for attending this discussion today. And also thank you so much for those of you who have attended online. It's been really great to be able to talk about this today. And even if you didn't have questions now, if you have any in the future, please feel free to reach out to us. We would be very happy to receive those. Amy, Fairley, Cherie, and Shane, thank you so much for sharing your insights and experiences on tertiary education in the prison settings. I'd also like to thank the Committee for the Advancement of Learning and Teaching for creating this opportunity for us to discuss these important issues, and to OCF for supporting this mahi. And thank you also to the lovely media productions team for producing this live broadcast and helping us look in the right direction, hopefully. Thank you so much for coming today and for engaging with us. We really appreciate your time and your ears. Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Kia ora.